I was sitting at table 12, the crystal centerpiece reflecting a dozen fractured images of the ballroom. It was a sea of champagne, gold, and white orchids, a room aglow with the kind of expensive, curated happiness that only money can buy. This was my son's, David's, second wedding. Beside me, my 7-year-old grandson, Noah, was quietly pushing a small, die-cast red airplane across the immaculate white tablecloth. His focus was absolute, a tiny island of childhood innocence in an ocean of adult murmuring and clinking glasses. I reached out and gently straightened the tiny, perfect bow tie at his neck. The gesture was an ache. He had his mother's eyes, clear and deep. I still saw her, Clara, in every one of his expressions. The jazz band played a soft, sophisticated tune. I scanned the room for David. He was moving between tables, his arm around his new wife, Olivia. He was laughing, a bright, brittle sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was toasting, thanking guests, playing the part of the happy groom. Olivia, stunning in a dress that seemed to be spun from diamonds and moonlight, posed for a photo with a group of her friends. Her smile was flawless, radiant, and as cold as the ice in her glass. I felt a familiar, unwelcome tightening in my chest and told myself, again, that I was just being a foolish old woman. A waiter moved gracefully behind us, refilling water glasses. An older couple at our table, distant cousins of my late husband, smiled at me. "He's getting so big, Margaret," the woman Cynthia said, nodding toward Noah. "He just turned 7, I replied, forcing a smile. I turned back to cut a small piece of the dinner roll for Noah. He looked up, gave me a brief, grateful glance, and then his attention snapped back to his toy plane, as if it were his only anchor in this strange, loud place. Suddenly, Noah stopped. His hand froze on the little red plane. His entire body went rigid. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a seriousness that was terrifying in a 7-year-old. He grabbed my hand, his small fingers like ice, gripping me with surprising strength. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice urgent and trembling, "I want to go home, right now." My heart lurched. I leaned in, putting my hand on his small, tense shoulder. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Tell Grandma what's wrong." Noah shuddered, his lips pressed into a thin, white line. He leaned in so close his hair brushed my cheek. He whispered so faintly I could barely hear him. "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" The words were a shard of ice in my heart. A dreadful, suffocating anguish began to bloom in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to keep my voice calm, for his sake. "It's all right, my love. Let Grandma look," I said, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Slowly, I lifted the edge of the heavy linen tablecloth. I peered into the darkness beneath. I saw the legs of the chairs, Noah's small shoes swinging nervously, and then I saw it. Lying next to Noah's foot, as if it had been dropped, was a small, folded piece of paper. It looked like a slip from a waiter's notepad. It was so small, so innocuous, but its presence made my blood run cold. Noah huddled against me, his small hand gripping my arm. I could feel him shaking. I reached down, my own hand trembling, and picked up the note. The world around me, the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, faded into a dull roar. My world shrank to the size of that 3-inch square of paper. I unfolded it. The dim candlelight was just enough to make out the hurried, elegant script. Table 12. Ensure the boys serving, Noah, has the peanut garnish. Extra, oh. A few simple words. A death sentence. The blood turned to ice in my veins. The air was stolen from my lungs. Noah, my Noah. He is severely, lethally allergic to peanuts. Anaphylaxis. A single, microscopic trace could close his throat, stop his heart. Our entire family, our friends, everyone knew. It was the central, terrifying fact of his life. Extra. Ah. Olivia. I squeezed Noah's hand, my mind racing. I stood up abruptly, scraping my chair. The couple at our table stopped talking, their smiles fading into concern. I scooped Noah up into my arms, burying my face in his hair, my body shielding him as if the air itself was now poison. The laughter and music continued, but for me, the party was over. Everything was a lie. Memories, sharp and unwelcome, flooded my mind, pulling me from the glittering ballroom and back into the past, back to the years when our family was whole, before the ground had opened up and swallowed our world. I once thought my son's home, our home, would be a place of enduring, simple joy, but life had other plans. I remember Clara, my first daughter-in-law, my David's first love, as clearly as I remember the scent of the lemon trees in her yard. She was warm, gentle, and real. She never wore a mask. Her smile was a genuine, beautiful thing that started in her eyes and spread, warming everyone around her. She was, in every way that mattered, the daughter I had never had. I remember those breezy Saturday afternoons in their small house in Arlington, just outside Boston. The sound of Noah's laughter, then just a toddler, echoing in the backyard as he chased their clumsy golden retriever. Clara would be on the porch, a bowl of snap peas in her lap, smiling as she watched her son. "Margaret, you have to try this new lemon bar recipe," she'd say, her voice bright, handing me a still warm square. We would sit and talk for hours about simple things, the garden, a book I was reading, Noah's new words. But the most vivid memory, the one that is both a comfort and a wound, was the night Noah got croup. He was only 2. His breathing was a harsh, barking seal, a terrifying sound in the middle of the night. He was burning with fever, his small body struggling. Clara held him, her face pale with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Margaret, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat with her, in the blue light of the nursery, taking turns pressing cool, damp cloths to his forehead. "He's strong, honey. He's a fighter," I'd said, my own heart aching with fear. We stayed awake together until the first gray light of dawn, when his fever finally broke and his breathing eased. Clara looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but full of gratitude. "Thank you, Mom," she'd said. I couldn't have. I don't know what I would have done. I just held her hand, a silent promise that I would always be there for her, for David, for Noah. I thought that little family was invincible. But 2 years later, on a perfectly clear, cold Tuesday in October, it all fell apart. The phone rang while I was shelving books at the library. A state trooper, a cold, professional voice. "There's been an accident on the Mass Pike. A truck. It crossed the median." I don't remember driving to the hospital. I just remember the smell of antiseptic, the terrible, humming silence of the waiting room. David was there, slumped in a plastic chair, his face gray. He looked up at me, his eyes vacant, hollow. "She's gone, Mom," he'd whispered. "She's gone. Clara, gone." In an instant, the funeral was a blur of black coats and torrential rain. The sky wept with us. Noah, only 4, was in my arms. He was confused, his small face buried in my neck. "Where's Mommy?" he kept asking. I held him, my own tears blinding me, and whispered, "Mommy is in the stars, my love." David collapsed. He was a shell. At the grave, he couldn't speak. I knew he was trying to be strong, but his gaze was empty, as if his soul had been ripped out and buried with her. After that, our lives became a long, gray tunnel. David buried himself in his work at the finance firm. He left before Noah woke up. He came home after Noah was asleep. He was running, trying to fill the void with spreadsheets and late-night meetings. But Noah, my poor Noah, he was the one who suffered most. He stopped laughing. He became a quiet, somber little boy. He was haunted by a loss he couldn't understand. And so, I stepped in. Clara's younger sister, Emily, stepped in. We became Noah's world. Emily, who had adored her sister, moved into our guest house. She was as broken as we were, but we held each other up. We became his anchors. I took him to school. Emily taught him to draw, sitting with him for hours at the kitchen table. I held him every night when the nightmares came, rocking him, telling him stories about his mother. "Grandma, tell me about Mommy," he'd ask. his voice small in the dark. And I would tell him. About her lemon bars, about the way she sang off-key in the car, about how she loved him, fiercely, more than anything. Emily was a blessing. She was Clara's blood, her spirit. She loved Noah as if he were her own. I watched her with him, patiently guiding his hand as he drew, and my heart ached. Sometimes, I would catch Emily watching David when he'd come home, a look of such profound sadness and a deep, unspoken something else in her eyes. I saw it, but I said nothing. Our family was too fragile, held together by the thinnest of threads. The house, once filled with Clara's light, became quiet. But thanks to Emily and Noah, the small flame of our family, of a family, remained. I did everything I could to protect it. But in the depths of my heart, I knew David was still lost. He was living with a wound that had never, ever healed. The memory is as sharp as broken glass. I was in my living room, the one that still held the ghost of Clara's laugh, when David brought Olivia home. It had been 3 years since the accident. He'd arrived with a brittle brightness in his eyes, a forced cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. "Mom," he said, "I want you to meet someone." Olivia walked in. She was a vision, an architect from a wealthy Boston family, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored suit, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect, sleek knot. She smiled, and it was a masterpiece of dentistry. "It's a true pleasure to meet you, Margaret," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk. She shook my hand. Her hand was cold. Her eyes, as they scanned my comfortable, slightly worn living room, were even colder. They were assessing, calculating. David, desperate for a new beginning, was blind to it. He was so happy, so animated, in a way I hadn't seen in years. He didn't see what I saw. He didn't see the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Your home is so charming," she'd said, running a finger over my worn velvet armchair. The word charming sounded like an insult. Noah, then 6, had hidden behind my legs. Olivia crouched down, her perfect smile in place. "Hello, Noah, I've heard so much about you." She held out a chocolate bar. Noah just stared, then buried his face deeper into my skirt. Olivia's smile tightened for just a fraction of a second before she stood up, laughing it off. "He's just shy." Emily, who had been standing by the fireplace, just watched. She didn't say a word. The silence between her and Olivia was immediate and absolute, a silent, instinctive declaration of war. Time passed. David, in his whirlwind attempt to build a new life, married her 6 months later, a quick, lavish affair at a downtown hotel, and Olivia moved in. The small, subtle signs began. The erasure of Clara. "Darling," she'd say to David, "don't you think all these photographs are a bit morbid? It's not healthy for Noah to be surrounded by, well, you know." One by one, the photos of Clara disappeared from the living room, moved to an album, then to a box, then to the attic. Then came the comments about Noah's allergy. I was in the kitchen, preparing Noah a snack, sunflower butter and apple slices. Olivia walked in, sipping a glass of wine. "Is all this really necessary, Margaret? This extreme caution? I mean, my cousin's son had an allergy, and he just grew out of it. Are you sure you're not coddling him?" "He's anaphylactic, Olivia," I'd said, my voice sharp. "It's not being coddled. It's keeping him alive." She just shrugged, that perfect smile in place, and walked away. Another time, Emily had been baking cookies. Olivia came in. "Oh, what are those? Peanut butter?" "No," Emily said, her voice like ice. "Chocolate chip. As you know, we don't allow peanuts in this house." Right, Olivia had trilled. "Silly me, I keep forgetting." But she didn't forget. I knew she didn't. And Noah, my bright, happy boy, began to withdraw. He spent more and more time in his room, or with me, or with Emily. He stopped running to his father when David came home, because David was always with Olivia. He grew quieter, more watchful. His fear of her was a tangible thing, a cold draft in the house that only the 3 of us, me, Noah, and Emily, seemed to feel. And now, at the wedding, holding this note, I saw it all. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't ignorance. It was a plan. This was her final act of erasure. With Noah gone, the last living piece of Clara, of David's past, would be gone too. He would be hers, completely. I stood in the ballroom, the note crumpled in my fist, a piece of burning coal. Noah was clinging to me, his small body trembling. I looked across the room. I saw Olivia, laughing, holding her champagne glass, the perfect bride. I saw David, smiling, trapped in her web. I turned to Emily, who was sitting at the table, her face as pale as the tablecloth. She had seen the note. She had seen my face. She understood. Her eyes were not just sad. They were full of a cold, clear rage. I had to be sure. I couldn't just accuse. I needed confirmation. I saw the maître d', a man in a sharp tuxedo, standing near the ballroom entrance. I picked up Noah. "Emily," I whispered, "stay here." I walked across the floor, Noah heavy in my arms. The maître d' saw me approaching, my face a mask of stone, and his professional smile wavered. "Mrs. Hayes, is everything all right?" I held out the crumpled note. "Who gave this to you? Who gave this to the kitchen staff?" He frowned, looking at the note. "Ma'am, I don't." "This note," I said, my voice low and shaking, "is an order to put peanuts in my grandson's food. He has a fatal allergy." "Who wrote this?" His eyes widened in horror. "My God! Ma'am, let me get the banquet captain. Miguel!" A younger waiter hurried over. The maître d' showed him the note. "Miguel, this order for table 12. Where did it come from?" Miguel, the young waiter, looked terrified. "Sir, I didn't give that to the kitchen. The bride, Mrs. Hayes." She stopped me, maybe an hour ago. She gave me the note herself. My blood ran cold. She said the boy, Noah, loved peanuts," the waiter stammered, "and that he was sad his dish didn't have any. She said to add extra as a special treat, and that she'd initialed it O for Olivia, so the chef would know it was her request." I closed my eyes. It was done. The confirmation was a physical blow. "Thank you, Miguel," I said, my voice flat. I turned to the maître d'. "Please have the chef stop all food service to our table, immediately, and I need you to have a security guard stand by, discreetly." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his face grim. I walked back to my table, Noah still clinging to me. Emily stood up as I approached. "It was her," I said. Emily's face crumpled, then hardened. "That monster." I sat Noah down. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "I need you to stay right here with Aunt Emily. Don't eat anything. Do you understand? Not one thing." He nodded, his eyes huge. I stood up. I looked across the room at my son, David, trapped in his illusion. I looked at Olivia, a predator in a white dress. The music was playing, a light, happy tune. I walked to the band leader. I put my hand on his arm. "I'm sorry," I said. "Please, stop playing, just for a moment." He looked at me, confused, but something in my face made him nod. He tapped his stand. The music died. The conversations in the ballroom guttered out, one by one. The clinking of glasses stopped. 200 people turned to look at me, a 65-year-old woman in a simple blue dress, standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. I saw David and Olivia turn. Olivia's smile was still in place, but her eyes were narrowed, curious. I walked to the microphone, the one they had used for the toasts. I picked it up. The small sound of it switching on echoed in the vast, silent room. "Good evening," I said. My voice was trembling, but the microphone amplified it, made it strong. "I'm Margaret Hayes, David's mother. I'd like to make a toast, an unexpected one." David looked confused, but he smiled, raising his glass. Olivia's smile was strained. "This is a day of new beginnings," I said, my voice growing stronger. "A day to celebrate new love, but it's also a day to remember the love that came before, the love that made this all possible." I saw David's smile waver. Olivia's face tightened. "I want a toast." to Clara, I said. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a shocking breach of etiquette. David's face went white. To Clara, I continued, my daughter-in-law, my friend, and Noah's mother, who is here with us in spirit, and who is here in the beautiful, wonderful boy she left behind. Mom, David said, his voice a low, warning growl. A boy, I said, my voice rising, who someone in this room tried to murder tonight. The silence was absolute. It was a living thing, heavy and terrifying. You could hear a pin drop. Margaret, you're drunk, Olivia said, her voice a sharp, nervous laugh. What are you talking about? You're ruining our night. Am I? I said. I held up the small, crumpled note. I found this, under my table. It's a note for the kitchen. It says, Table 12. Ensure the boy's serving, Noah, has the peanut garnish. Extra. It's even initialed. O. David took a step forward, his face a mask of confusion. What? I don't. Mom, it's a mistake. A horrible mistake. Is it, David? Emily's voice, clear and cold, cut through the room. She was standing now, her hand on Noah's shoulder. Is it a mistake, Olivia? Or is it like the time you forgot to check the cookie ingredients? Or the time you told David that Noah's allergy was just picky eating? This is insane, Olivia shrieked. You're jealous. You're trying to destroy my happiness. She turned to David, her eyes wide with feigned tears. Darling, they're lying. They've hated me from the beginning. Miguel, I called out. The young waiter was standing by the service door, pale and shaking. Miguel, please come here. He walked forward, trembling. Miguel, I said, my voice gentle, please tell my son who gave you this note. Miguel looked at Olivia. She was staring at him, her eyes boring into him, a look of pure, murderous rage. He looked at me. He looked at David. He took a deep breath. It was her, sir. The bride, Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice low but clear. She stopped me by the bar. She gave me the note. She said the boy loved peanuts, and to add extra as a special treat. She said the O was so the chef would know it was from her. All the air left the room. David looked at Olivia. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. The illusion, the beautiful lie he had built around himself, had just shattered into a million pieces. Olivia, he whispered, tell me he's lying. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me something. And Olivia's face changed. The mask didn't just crack, it fell away. The performative tears vanished. Her beautiful features hardened into something ugly, something cornered and venomous. She's jealous, she spat, pointing at Emily. And she's a bitter old woman. She pointed at me. They never wanted you to be happy. They're obsessed with your dead wife. I was trying to give you a new life. A better life. A better life? David's voice was hollow. By killing my son? By killing the only thing, the only part of her I have left? He's a constant reminder. Olivia screamed, finally unraveling. He's all you see. You never look at me. Not really. I wanted him gone. I wanted her gone. It was a confession, full, public, and horrifying. David staggered back as if he'd been shot. He looked at this woman, his wife of 2 hours, and he didn't see the beautiful architect. He saw a monster. He looked at me, his eyes a ruin of shame. He looked at Noah, who was hiding behind Emily, his small face pale. He turned back to Olivia. Get out, he whispered. What? Get out. His voice was low, but it filled the room. Get out of this hotel. Get out of my life. David, you can't. Get out, he roared, a sound of such profound, primal grief that it shook the chandeliers. Security. The guard who had been waiting by the door stepped forward. Olivia looked at David, at me, at the 200 guests, staring in horror. She knew it was over. She grabbed her champagne glass and with a final hateful sob, threw it at me. It missed, shattering on the floor. Emily stepped in front of me, a human shield. Get her out of here, David said, his voice dead. As the guards took her arm, Olivia, her diamond dress glittering, was escorted, sobbing and cursing, from her own wedding. The ballroom was silent. save for her receding shrieks. David stood alone in the center of the dance floor. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at us, at me, at Emily, and at his son, Noah, and he did the only thing he could. He crumpled to the floor. In the days that followed, our family was plunged into a quiet, cold hell. The wedding, of course, was over. The guests, horrified, had vanished, leaving behind a ballroom full of cold food and white orchids. David's collapse was total. He didn't just grieve, he shattered. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it broke not only his present, but his past. He had to face the truth, that his desperate need for a new life, for a replacement for Clara, had made him blind. He had invited a predator into his home and given her his name. The annulment was fast. Olivia, facing criminal charges for attempted murder, didn't contest it. Her wealthy family, horrified by the public scandal and the irrefutable proof, disowned her. She disappeared, her name becoming a dark whisper, a ghost story. But our family, we were the ones left in the wreckage. David moved out of the grand house he had shared with Olivia and moved back into the guest house, the small space Emily had been living in. Emily moved into the main house, with me and Noah. Our roles reversed. David, the strong son, became the one who needed care. He wouldn't speak for days. He would just sit in the garden, staring at the lemon trees that Clara had planted. He was consumed by a guilt so deep it was almost paralyzing. He had failed. He had failed Clara. He had failed Noah. It was Emily who, once again, held us together. She, who had every right to be angry, to say, "I told you so," showed nothing but a quiet, powerful grace. She cooked for him. She sat with him in the evenings, not talking, just being present. She forced him to go on walks. And I did what I had always done. I took care of Noah. I was his rock. I read to him. I baked with him. I held him when he had nightmares, which had returned. Is the bad lady gone?" he'd ask. "Yes, my love," I'd whisper. "She's gone. She can never hurt you again. You're safe." Slowly, painfully, David began to heal. He started talking again, first to his therapist, then to us. One night, I found him in the kitchen, staring at a picture of Clara he had put back on the wall. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, not turning around. "I was so blind. I was so desperate to not be in pain anymore that I grabbed onto a lie." "I know, David," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "She was right about one thing," he said, his voice thick. "I never really saw her. I was just using her to cover the hole Clara left. And she was just using me." It was a painful, honest admission. As the months passed, a new normal began to take root. Our trio, me, Emily, and Noah, became a foursome. But it was different. David was no longer the absent father, the grieving widower. He was just David, present, quiet, healing. He and Emily, their relationship had always been complicated, shadowed by Clara's memory. But now, in the shared space of their grief and their love for Noah, something new began to grow. It wasn't a whirlwind, it was the opposite. It was slow, quiet, and built on a foundation of shared, terrible truth. I saw it in small moments. The way he'd watch her reading to Noah, a look of quiet admiration in his eyes. The way she'd bring him a cup of coffee in the morning, without asking, just knowing. The way they'd share a look, a small, sad smile, when Noah did something that was so perfectly Clara. They were two people who had loved the same woman, and in that shared love, they found a new one for each other. One night, a full year after the wedding, I came downstairs for a glass of water. I heard voices from the porch. I saw them, David and Emily, sitting on the old swing. He was holding her hand. "I was so afraid," David was saying. "Afraid that loving you would be a betrayal of her." "It's not," Emily whispered. "Clara, she would want this. She would want you to be happy. She would want us to be happy." He looked at her, and in the moonlight, I saw him smile. A real smile, one that finally reached his eyes. I went back to bed, and I slept, a deep, peaceful sleep, for the first time in a very long time. 2 years after that terrible night, we were in the backyard. It was Noah's 9th birthday. The yard was full of his friends, shrieking and laughing, running through a sprinkler. David was at the grill, flipping burgers. Emily was beside him, cutting a watermelon. They were arguing, playfully, about whether he was burning the food. I was sitting on the porch, watching. Noah, his face sticky with chocolate frosting, ran up to me. "Grandma, come play." He was no longer the quiet, fearful boy. He was loud. He was joyful. He was, in every way, safe. He grabbed my hand. "Look," he said, pointing. David had his arm around Emily's waist, and he was kissing her. Noah just smiled. "They're silly," he said. "Yes, they are," I said, my heart so full I thought it might burst. I looked at this new family, forged in the crucible of such a terrible betrayal. I understood something then. Life isn't about finding a perfect, unbroken happiness. It's about what we build from the pieces. True family isn't about blood or vows or the absence of pain. It's about who shows up in the darkness. It's about who, when the entire world has fallen apart, sits with you in the wreckage and helps you, piece by piece, to rebuild. The evil that Olivia brought into our lives was a fire. It was meant to destroy us, to burn away the last, precious remnants of our past. But it failed. It only burned away the lies, the grief, and the illusions. And in the ashes, it left behind something stronger, something truer, something that could finally, truly, grow.